Hey friends! So unless you've been living under a rock, there's a plugin called Trackspacer that's found its way into thousands of studios all over the place, and for good reason too. It's extremely useful. It's a dynamic EQ. It's great for side-chaining one track with another and getting one track out of the way when there are frequency conflicts. So in this video, we're going to take a closer look at Trackspacer and see when it's good to use Trackspacer and when it's not. Right? Let's check it out. Okay, so I've created a purposefully busy mix where there are all kinds of tracks conflicting with each other in terms of their frequency content. So instead of playing it all at once, let's just listen to each element. There's a bass track, sounds like this. There's a serum track, sounds like this. Upright piano. And then this is the kit. Okay, so now I'll play them all together and listen for the fact that every single element in this mix sounds like it's fighting for your attention. Take a listen. Now, things don't necessarily sound bad, and I'll admit that I hastily slapped this idea together with conflicts on purpose. Like, I did this on purpose, right? There is obviously a lot of competition here. So right off the bat, I'm just going to get this out of the way quickly. A lot of folks use Trackspacer to get the bass out of the way when the kick drum hits. This is the most classic use for any side chaining situation, whether it's a compressor or otherwise. So I'm going to grab a Trackspacer, drop it on this operator. This operator is my bass. Now, here's the interface. It's very clean. It's really, really nice interface, super simple to use. Essentially, in Ableton, when you have a plugin that can take a sidechain input, it appears down here in this box. So I'm just going to choose the drum track, and I'm going to choose my kick drum. Okay, so this happens to be my kick drum. And now when I play this, I'll go ahead and solo the bass. We can see on this panel the incoming signal versus the signal that's already there. So check it out. I'll go ahead and unmute the drums and we'll take a listen together. Now, if I turn this amount knob all the way down, the effect is basically bypassed. Take a listen. What I'm listening for here, the conflict that I'm hearing here is in the subs, okay? I hear that the subs of the kick and the subs of the bass are in conflict. In fact, let's just take a look at this real quick so I can totally explain what's happening. Now, on the kick drum, I'm going to go ahead and solo the kick drum. We can see, you can open up EQ8 and really take a closer look, but you can see right around here, we're having a 60 hertz hump, and this is, as far as I'm concerned, 60 hertz and below is sub frequencies. What does sub mean? Sub means it's below our hearing, right? We don't necessarily hear sub frequencies, we feel them more than anything else. Okay, so that's why they call them sub frequencies, subsonic, right? So everything above 60 hertz are things that we hear. Everything above 60 hertz in this case are harmonics. Like on the bass, for example, if we look at this, what we're seeing for the bass instrument is this is what's considered the fundamental frequency, okay? It's the lowest frequency being generated, and everything above the fundamental frequency is considered harmonics, right? Harmonics are kind of more like the things that we hear, and sub-bass is more like we feel. So in this case, this bass has harmonics that we hear and sub-bass. And so as you can see, both the operator and the kick drum of this drum set are making conflicting frequencies. So the idea is we're just getting the bass out of the way whenever the kick drum hits, okay? So back into Trackspacer, we can see our conflicting ranges down here in the subs. Essentially, you could think of this area right here as the subs. So as I turn this up, listen. Now, we've effectively isolated the kick drum whenever the kick drum happens, right? And then the subs come back in when it's gone. Now, this sounds extremely unnatural, right? This is really heavy-handed. It's almost like the bass is getting pulled out and then getting pushed back into the mix, right? Well, there's a couple things we can do to mitigate that to make this sound better. First of all, I'm only concerned with the conflicts in the subs, right? I'm not necessarily as concerned with the conflicts in the harmonic ranges, right? So what I can do is I can use this handy high cut, and what this filter will do is essentially it will bypass the effect above this line. So as I pull this down, You got to kind of mess with it a little bit. But now that this has been dialed back, I could actually maybe even get away with more amount. So maybe I'll turn the amount up to 50%. Now, hopefully you're wearing headphones or you have big speakers. Now I'm just going to A/B this Trackspacer and listen to the difference it makes. All of a sudden, the subs are less flubby, right? They sound a little bit better. Okay, so usually that's about as far as most folks will take Trackspacer, but we're going to dive into this thing real deep. If you click on this blue circle right here, you also have attack and release settings. And of course, if we want to get this bass that has top-end harmonics, right? There is treble in it, okay? If we want to get this out of the way for that initial transient, we need to pull the attack down. This will make Trackspacer act as quickly as it can upon the signal. And you can even see it. Watch how much faster it's reacting. Now listen to that kick drum and listen to the front end of the kick drum, the transient, the snap of the kick drum as I turn this up. It'll get quieter. It kind of gets vlah, 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 right? So you want the attack all the way down in this situation. And then release, of course, this is how long it takes to return back to its original setting. This does not have to be that high. Let's turn it down to 10 milliseconds and see what happens. Awesome. Okay, so again, that's about as far as most people will take Trackspacer. But let's go ahead and look at a much more extreme example where we have two instruments that are super competing. So we have this Serum track, and then this is an upright piano track. I copied the Serum clip, so don't get confused. This is the Serum track. This is the piano track. So take a listen to these together. Now, in this situation, we obviously have two tracks that are extremely in competition with each other. Let's go ahead and grab an EQ8. I'll put it on my Serum and take a look in here. So yet again, we're identifying that fundamental frequency. In fact, I'll make this even bigger so we can take a look. We can see that the fundamental frequencies of this pad instrument here is right in this range. So really between 400 and 200 hertz, that's where our fundamental frequencies are. And then everything above that is harmonics, right? Okay, so then looking at the piano, let's do the same thing. The upright piano track, we can see we've got a lot of competition in that 200 hertz range, right? 200 hertz up to 400, 500, something like that. In this range, both of these instruments are fighting for your attention, right? They're making their most significant notes in this area. Now, of course, reaching for a Trackspacer, we can get one track out of the way, and we can do it in all these creative ways, which, yes, I'm about to show you. But I want to explain something first. A lot of folks will just reach for Trackspacer or reach for an EQ or reach for something else to solve this issue, when really, in a lot of ways, this is sort of a compositional issue, okay? And let me explain why. I'm going to rename this to piano just so we can totally not be confused. So if I take both of these clips, okay, and I double click on them, bringing up the piano roll. If I click on the first one and shift click on the second one, notice now that I can see both of the clips in different colors in the piano roll, right? So the piano is in yellow and the Serum track is in green. Look at how many notes are overlapping with each other, okay? You can't even see this, but if I were to click on Serum, check it out. The same notes on the bass are the same notes on the piano. Right? So the same notes on the Serum track are the same notes as on the piano. Now, there are other ways to mitigate this issue for frequency competition, okay? I could simply move the notes. So looking at the Serum track, I could select these four notes, hold Shift, okay, and then click the up key. What that's going to do is it's going to jump those lowest bass notes up an octave, okay? And now when I play these two tracks together, take a listen. There's still some frequency competition, but it's so much less. Listen to this where they're dropped back down. Listen to how much more muddy that sounds. I'll let them both play together. So I just think it's really important, okay, for people to understand that always reaching for an effect to fix an issue in your mix, it might be a compositional issue, okay? But let's just say, for argument's sake, that you refuse to change the notes in this and you really want it to sound this specific way. That's fine. That's totally fine. Okay, so let's look at how we could use Trackspacer to fix this issue. So I will go to Trackspacer, and this time let's put it on the serum track. Okay, so, and we can say, all right, let's go ahead and feed the piano track into the serum track. So when I do this, take a look. Now when I turn it off, now, this is sort of working for me, but unfortunately the serum track is really getting ducked out. And why is that? Well, because essentially these two different parts are making the same frequencies, right? So even this 15% amount here is really taking this serum track out of the mix, and I don't necessarily want that. So what we need to do is really dial in what exactly we're talking about. What exactly do we want to do here, okay? So yet again, I can reach for my handy high cut and I can pull this down a little bit. So basically what this is gonna do is it's gonna leave the harmonics of the serum track untouched. And we're just gonna focus in on the conflicting range here between 200 and like 500 hertz. And now that I've pulled that amount down, I could probably get away with more ratio, maybe 25%. Now, you might be asking, why aren't you concerned about the harmonics? Well, here's the thing. As we move up the frequency spectrum, the harmonics get farther and farther and farther and farther apart from each other. Not every single C note, for example, is going to make the exact same harmonics every single time. It depends upon the nature of the instrument, okay? Some instruments are going to be making more even harmonics than odd harmonics. Other instruments are going to be making more odd harmonics, right? So in this case, the actual conflicting zone, okay, the zone that's really messing with my ears happens to be in this low-mid section, right? So taking a listen now, we can hear that issue kind of worked itself out, okay? So real quick, if you're enjoying this video and you enjoy my teaching style, I highly recommend that you check out my Ableton online courses that I have. I am proud to say that at the making of this video, we now have over 600 people enrolled in this, and our Discord community is thriving. It's just so awesome. So about the courses themselves, each one of them has 25 hours and growing of video lesson content just like this, organized and categorized to take your skills to the next level quickly and efficiently. YouTube is awesome for learning, but the information is not organized. You don't have the community. You don't have the mentorship. If you want to learn more about them, here's a link also down in the description and in the comments. Let's get back to it. But I also want to show you something. Trackspacer is so much cooler than just this, okay? Trackspacer has extra stuff under the hood that's really worth looking at. So yet again, let's go and look at what they call the quote-unquote advanced panel. And I want to look at pan, because I really think there's a better way to deal with this. At the moment, when I turn this Trackspacer on, listen to this. A lot of this serum track's stereo information is in the low mids, right? It sounds a lot less stereo when I turn on Trackspacer. This track kind of shrinks down. So my track is sort of losing width, and I don't really enjoy that. What I want to show you now, though, is a really cool trick. So in Trackspacer, we also have a panning control. So what this pan control actually does is it focuses the effect either to the left or to the right. So if I focus the effect to the left, okay, what's going to happen is that the right is going to be less affected by the plugin, okay? And what's going to happen is now the serum track is going to kind of bounce around to the right. And to make this even more apparent, let's get rid of our high cut, okay, and really let this kind of bounce around. So we can see that it's really pushing that down. But if I focus the effect over to the left, take a listen. Notice how the right channel is not being affected as much. And so if I turn the ratio down, maybe back to 15, take a listen. So what I'm effectively doing is I'm reducing the amount of competition, right, in that 200 to 400 hertz range. But what I'm also doing is I'm adding this new stereo element that wasn't there before. It's truly awesome. I really, really like this. So Something else I want to show you is that if I return this back to the middle, we also have mid-side mode. Suffice it to say that mid mode means everything that's in phase or everything that's mono, and side mode means everything that's out of phase, which are the stereo elements, okay, of the signal. At the moment, if I take the pan knob, all of a sudden this pan knob changes from being left or right to being mid or side, okay? So for example, let's say I wanted to reduce all of the side information whenever the piano hits. I could turn it this way. So take a listen to what this does. So what I'm doing is I'm preserving the low end in the mid of this channel, but I'm ducking down the side. So this is getting closer to maybe something that we'd really want, but because all the stereo information of this serum track is in the lows, we need to enhance the side information somewhere else. So instead of using Trackspacer for that, I could just reach for an EQ8, okay? So I could change my EQ8 over to mid-side mode, for example. I'm going to switch it to side, and I'm going to start pushing up the mid-range in the side. So take a listen. Now, if I group both of these effects together, this is what it sounded like before. Listen how much mud is in there. And then if I turn this on, we're getting kind of closer, right? I think I could probably get away with a little more amount now that I've boosted those harmonics. Let's try it now. Okay, so I want to explain one more thing about Trackspacer that's really, really useful. Let's look at this piano. So I'm going to play this piano track and let's take a look at the frequencies here. We know that the fundamental frequency of the piano's note is happening up here. But what we also can hear is the hammers, right, hitting the strings of the piano, and they're making these sub-frequencies, right? Maybe it's the impact of the fingers or the foot on the pedal. One way or another, there are frequencies under the fundamental, okay? Now, one thing we could do, of course, is we could just high pass them out of the way. So we could just turn this filter over to a low cut and pull these out completely. Now listen. And that works, but there's a part in the song where the piano is isolated, right? It's by itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play it here, and I'm going to turn this EQ8 on and off. And listen to how much is lost. So there's a life to having those bass frequencies in there. It makes the piano seem more alive, right? And so in this case, where there isn't any bass or any conflicts, why would I have this high-pass filter here? And yes, of course, what I could do is I could just automate this on and off. But this is an advantage of Trackspacer. So I'm going to show you how I can do this instead with Trackspacer. So I'll grab a Trackspacer and put it in here, and I'm going to say, okay, Trackspacer, take your input from the bass. So operator 1. And now looking at Trackspacer, what I can do is use my high cut and say, okay, everything under my problem frequencies that I was talking about before, everything under them, this stuff, let's move the piano out of the way when the bass happens. And of course, with just these sub-frequencies selected, I can really go hard on the amount. Now, this might sound weird in isolation, and of course, whenever you're mixing, you really want to have your solo buttons not pushed that much, right? You want to be able to hear everything in context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out of here. I'm going to unsolo the kick drum, and now we're going to listen to this as it were. And so now we've got this convenient situation, okay? So when we go to this part where the piano is isolated, I don't need to do any automation. And let's say you've got a big set, right? You've got 100 tracks, right? You've got all these dependencies. You've got all these track spacers running. Instead of having to worry about automating an EQ on or off, you've got this track spacer working for you saying, okay, in this situation, at this area, check it out. There's no bass, so Trackspacer isn't doing anything, but over here, In the serum track, let's do one more thing. In the serum track, we can see obviously that it's also making bass, sub-bass frequencies. Take a look. And that's also because of some aliasing. There's some pleasing distortion on the serum track that is kind of making it gritty and sound nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and sweep the subs out of this part. And because I'm using an MS filter, I'll have to do that both on the M side and the S side. So I'll just switch this over to the M side, do the same thing. And now, there's no subs in there, right? Now, going back to here, so you can hear we've really cleaned this mix up. Maybe the last thing we'll do is just do my fun little thing where I like to take each track spacer, map it to the Q key, just so we can hear the big difference between all these different changes that we've made, right? So here's before. Awesome. So some closing thoughts here. There's a lot of dynamic EQ solutions out there. There are some that are deharshers like Soothe, or there are plugins like Pro Q3, which can be set into dynamic modes. And then there's something like Trackspacer, which is more of like a side-chained dynamic EQ. At the end of the day, these are really awesome modern tools, and they're really, really useful. But there's no replacement. I repeat, there's no replacement for good EQ and definitely good composition where you're not creating these problems for yourself in the first place. So I think a lot of folks, when they get this kind of plugin, they will immediately reach for it for everything, and they'll solve all of their problems forever, and they'll make what they consider a cleaner mix. But you got to be careful because you could be removing character. Sometimes when instruments clash with each other, it sounds cool, right? It's rock and roll. Sometimes it's fun to do that, right? So, experiment with these plugins, but don't get so reliant on them that your music is now devoid of life and character, okay? Conflicts are okay. That said, Trackspacer is a really powerful tool. It's really affordable, and it's really lightweight on your CPU. It's a great tool. I really enjoy using it. So awesome. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, like, comment, subscribe if this was useful to you. I'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks for watching.